I started a series last time I spoke called Restored, and I love restorations. I got a friend right now who's restoring an old car, and I've been able to see this at different stages. It's beautiful, and you can see how far he's come so far. It's like, I totally admire that. I have no ability to restore a car, but it's incredible when you see somebody do that, right? Restore an old house, restore a piece of furniture, but our God has the ability to restore a human life. Our God can restore human beings. That's really incredible. And I started this series, when I started last time, I said, I'm talking about this for this important reason, because a couple of years ago, my whole life was shattered into a million pieces. I hit bottom like I didn't know when you hit bottom, you can really shatter. And I was broken, and for a while, didn't know if I was even going to make it. And yet here I am 2 years later, in many aspects of my life, I'm healthier than I've been in years and years and years. And a couple of months ago, a friend of mine said, how'd you come back from that? How did you recover? And when he asked the question, I thought, I need to tell people how to come back from that. Because you're all smart enough to know I'm not the only one who goes through a breaking period in life, right? All of you will at some point experience something that makes you feel broken. Now, you may not be broken to the extent that I was. It may be worse. It may be better. But there will come points in your life, and all of our lives, and the people we love, where we will feel shattered. And it is imperative in that day that you know what to do to put yourself in a position where God can do his restoration work in your life. So that's why we're doing the series. I love this series. Cannot wait each week to do these messages. So excited about one we're going to talk about today. And so what I said when I started the series is all that we're going to talk about in this series will be rooted in a verse that Jesus taught about. Jesus was asked one day, he said, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus said this. Some of you know the answer. Jesus said, you got to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. So he said, there are these aspects of your life. You're more than just a body. You have a heart and a soul and a mind, and you have your body, your physical strength. All of these make up the real you. All of these. Now, in his context, and what he was talking about, he said, if you want to learn to really be a God follower, this is what you got to learn how to do. You got to love God. And let me ask you, do you love God with all your heart? Do you love God with all your soul, all your mind, all of your... Obviously, when you look at that in that way, you go, I got a long way to go, right? I'm just being honest, I do. I don't love him with all of those areas. So that's one aspect, and that's why we teach, that's why we do what we do, is designed to help you learn to love God more in these areas of your life. But the other thing is, for the purpose of this series, those are the areas that get broken. When you're shattered, those are the areas that shatter. And so last time we talked about, we started with the last one up there, your physical strength. You can't love God with all your physical strength if you have no physical strength. If your gauge is on empty, and I said, think of it like each of those 4 areas has a gauge in your life. You get this? You know what it's like when you look down and your gas gauge is on E, you go, oh no, I'm in trouble. I hope I'm close to a gas station, or I'm going to be walking, right? The car isn't going to work. You don't work in these areas if the gauge gets on empty. And the reality is, many of you, you're running on fumes in some of these key areas of your life. And any one of them going down, here's the thing, they're all interrelated. Any one of them goes down, they affect all the others. So that's why each one is so important. So we talked about physical strength last time, how to be aware when your strength is on empty, your physical strength is on empty, and what the Bible says about restoring that gauge. And so now I'm going to talk about one that's even tougher. We're going to talk about this. And I want to ask you today, where's your emotional gauge? How's your heart doing? Now, I know that if I could hear right now the answers that were in your head, some of you would be like, I have no idea, right? There are a lot of people in this world who have no idea. If I were to ask that question, how's your emotional gauge? They'd be like, I don't know. Now, some of you are very connected emotionally connected to your heart and your emotions, so you can answer intelligently. You're like, you know what? Emotionally, I'm feeling really good today. I feel strong and healthy. I feel like my emotional gauge is very full. Good for you. And then there are others that are like, I think it's here, but I'm not really sure. And then some of you know today that your emotional gauge is really, really low. Some of you, if you were putting a word to it, you'd say, I think it feels kind of broken. My heart feels kind of broken today. Some of you, your heart feels kind of numb. Or you know that it's really protected behind some big walls because of what you've lived through, or it feels cold. You ever had a heart that feels just tired or worn out? You're like, I just can't handle anything else. Some of you, if you're being honest, this is the condition of your heart today. This is where your heart's at. So the gauge is on empty. Now, why does it go to empty? Well, we're going to talk about this in an upcoming message, but for today, the number one thing that will drain your emotional gauge, is pain. Get hurt, and that gauge will go down. I have so many times in my life where I was able to observe this. One time, when I was a pastor at Hidden Valley, I had finished this long time without any break, any time off, many times not even a day off. So I'd run my physical gauge down to empty, but it was right before my vacation, so I thought, I'm going to make it, it'll be all right. And then I got a letter. And the letter was from some good friends who'd been in the church for a very long time, and they were writing to tell me they were leaving. And the number one reason they were leaving was me. And they just felt like they needed to tell me the things that they didn't like about me or my teaching as they were leaving. And I could sit there, I still remember sitting there reading that letter, and it was like I could see my gauge go down. It's like I have nothing left. Now I know, having thought about this and taught on this before, that when my emotional gauge goes down, there are patterns that emerge in my life. First off, I get real snippy. I've got no patience with people in situations that I normally would. I dream of running away, doing something else. Fun things aren't fun. That's the big one. Things that I normally really love doing have no real impact in my life at all. That's when I know my emotional gauge is really down low. I want to sleep all the time. I feel lethargic. Oftentimes addictions gain a lot of power right here because you got to feel good for some moment of your time. So the addiction at least gives you a temporary rush, but then of course when the addictive thing is over, it's back to normal. These are all signs that your emotional gauge is on empty. And I want to ask you, are you seeing any of the signs that your emotional gauge is on empty or low? Some of you don't need to see signs, you know it is. So what do you do? Well, that's what we're going to talk about, but I want to let you know today, this message is only part one. This is part one. I could not do everything we needed to do to talk about your heart in one message. So next time I teach, I'm going to talk about how to actually raise the gauge. If your heart is really low today, I'm very sorry. I'm not going to show you today how to raise that gauge. That's the message for next time. Instead, I felt like before I could talk about how to raise that gauge, I needed to help you really connect with your heart, because some of you live emotionally disconnected lives. Some of us lived that way for a long time. So I thought it was more important to start here, how to connect or reconnect with your heart, and then we'll talk about how to actually build it back. Now, some of this is going to actually help in recharging it, but I want to be clear, this is part one. Okay? So I want to ask you to grab your notes, grab a pen. There will be some very important things you're going to want to write down as we get into this today. You cannot love God with all your heart if your heart is broken, if your heart is on empty. So this is a really important topic. And welcome to those of you watching on YouTube. In the notes section below, the comment section below are the notes for this, so you can download them and follow along. Let's get started. Number one, you got to develop the correct view of your emotions. This is where we start. You won't take this seriously if you don't start here. Maybe some of you are already starting to check out a little bit. You're like, I don't see the value of this. And it depends on what you think about your heart. Now, the problem is there are a lot of conflicting views about this topic that we're talking about. I was raised in a home with a man who was very emotionally, it was all about suppressing emotional reactions of any kind. One of the formational moments of my childhood came when I was about 9 or 10 years old. I had this big German Shepherd dog. His name was King. And we kept King in this dog house quite a ways away from our house. And he had a long chain, so King could just be out running on the chain, and just kept him out there on the back part of our property. And so every morning and night, part of my job was to take a big scoop of food out to King, put it in his doghouse in his dog dish, and take care of the dog. So one night, I went outside, and it was pitch black. There was no light back where King's doghouse was. So I scooped up the food, I walked outside, and I heard my dog howling and crying out in pain. Now, I'd just seen Old Yeller. So, of course, you're thinking, he's being torn apart by a bear or something. I mean, it's like, I don't know, I'm a kid. So I'm terrified, and it's pitch black. I can't see what's happening. So I run inside, and I cry out, Dad, come quick. Something's happening to King. And Dad comes out, and the first thing he does is he grabs me, and he says, don't you ever lose your cool again. Don't you ever do that. And I have no idea how to respond. There's so many formative moments like that from my childhood. And the message repeated again and again and again and again and again to me as a child was, your emotional reactions are stupid. And they're wrong. And it's wrong how you feel. And many of you received that same message growing up. Your emotions are wrong. It's dumb that you feel this way. It's wrong that you feel this way. And so you got the wrong message. And then unfortunately for me, then I went to work in a church, and I hate to tell you this, but the church world has a very dysfunctional view of our heart. I was in a church in Madison for 6 years. It no longer exists. Thank God. It was such an unhealthy place. So many people walked away from their faith in that place. So I don't grieve the fact that that church went under. Some churches are so unhealthy they should go under. They hurt a lot of people. Part of what was so unhealthy about them was their whole view on the heart and emotions. Literally, when an emotional topic came up, this was the verse they quoted. Well, the heart's deceitful above all things, beyond cure. Who can understand it? This was their view of the heart. They would take this one verse and say, therefore, you don't listen to your emotions, you ignore your emotions, you make decisions only based on what you think, not on how you feel. Your feelings are stupid and wrong. And so the message of my childhood was reinforced in the church that I went to, and I was one screwed up duck. And I'm not alone. Many of you have heard this. Many of you have experienced this in your life, and there's a huge, huge problem with this. Your emotions and your heart were not an accident. Your emotions were not a result of the fall of humanity. Okay, it's not like God was in heaven and looked down one day and said, oh my goodness, they can feel things. Beelzebub, look I can't believe you did this to them. You gave them emotions? Oh my goodness, I never meant for them to have a heart and emotions. That's not how it happened. God created you and me in his image and gave us a heart and gave us the ability to feel. It's not an accident that you feel. He made you that way so that you could experience the life that he wants for you, because our God is a feeling God. So the truths you have to embrace before you can even listen to what we're talking about are right here on your notes. So first off on your notes, you have to write this down. My heart is a gift from God, and I am to love him with all of my heart. So you can't ignore your heart. You can't deny what's in your heart and love God with all your heart. You have to accept this truth. Your heart is a gift from God. Is that how you view your heart? Some days, yes. Some days, no. Right? Isn't that kind of how it feels? Some days, yep, it's a great gift. And some days it's like, you can take this gift back. Because it hurts too much, right? So the first thing you do is you understand that your heart is a gift from God, and you're to love him with all your heart. And the second truth on your notes, nothing to write down on this one, I just filled it in. My emotions are a gift from God. Is that how you think? Do you think that? Do you think your emotions are a gift from God? And again, depends on the emotion, right? And we tend to label emotions as good or bad. God doesn't. You're created in the image of God. Flip your notes over on the back. Take a look at this. I just did a quick search online. There's so many places. You see that list at the top? Every one of those emotions, anger, laughter, compassion, grief, love, hatred, jealousy, joy, all of them are emotions of God listed in the Bible with the reference where God felt those things. Now, we label them as good and bad. God doesn't. What you do with the emotion determines whether it's healthy or unhealthy, not feeling it. That determines it. What you do with it determines whether or not it's healthy or not. So there are two extremes to avoid when it comes to your heart and your emotions, and this I do want you to write down. You can ignore your heart or emotions. That's the first extreme. Some of you are doing that today. You are not paying attention to what's going on in your heart. On the other extreme, so common in American culture, is being controlled by them. Ever heard the phrase, follow your heart? That's wrong too. You don't want to ignore your heart. You don't want to put your heart in charge of your life. Neither of those are balanced. Neither of those are balanced. One author put it this way. He said, God designed your emotions to be gauges, not guides. They are meant to report to you, not dictate to you. One of my favorite speakers, a brilliant man named Ravi Zacharias, once put it this way. He said, emotions are indicators of reality for you. That's what they are. When you feel something, it's an indicator of some reality for you. And you shouldn't ignore it, you shouldn't deny it, shouldn't suppress it, and shouldn't let it drive you. You should process your emotions in a healthy way. So do you have the correct view of your heart today? Is that how you look at your heart? Is that how you look at your emotions? Now, what do you do with this? Number two, now you got to actually move toward your emotions. Now you got to move toward your emotions. Once you understand they're a gift, now you got to move toward the gift. And you don't have to move toward your emotions, do you? You do not have to do this. I can't tell you how many times I sat in an office listening to people talk about the pain in their lives. All of you know that there are a lot of people in terrible pain. Some of you have suffered terribly in your life. I can't tell you how many times I sat and listened to people talk about the pain in their life, and there was a problem. As they would tell me how much pain they'd suffered, their face would often have a smile on it. That doesn't match up. You're talking to me like you're telling me about your trip to Disney World, and you're telling me about the abuse you suffered as a child. That doesn't fit. But it's very, very common. So many times when they were done telling their story, I would say to them, you know what, it wasn't okay what was done to you. And often the response was, yep, I know, and often with a smile. And then I would say again, no, what happened to you should never have happened to you. It was wrong. You didn't deserve any of that happened to you. And once in a while, the pain that was right below the surface would just come pouring out. They weren't acknowledging it. They weren't turning toward it. They were trying to hide from it. Welcome to America. Some of you know what that's like because that's what you're doing. You are not turning toward your heart, not turning towards your emotions, because obviously you don't want to, because you know what's there. You know if you turn toward this, your heart, and you start paying attention to it, you're going to have to deal with pain. And it's going to hurt, and you're going to feel how lonely you actually are, and you don't want to feel that. And you're going to feel how sad you actually are, and you don't want to feel that. And you don't want to feel how scared or anxious you actually are, and you don't want to feel that. Totally get it. And yet by trying to turn away from it, here's what you get. Depression, anxiety, physical illness. You know you can make yourself physically sick by trying to ignore the gift that God put in you when he gave you your emotions. Nightmares, mood swings, unexplained sadness, addictions gain tremendous power from people who run from their pain. Repressed memories, on we go with all these negative consequences. God wants none of this for you. He wants you to turn toward your heart, turn toward your emotions. So what does that mean? Here you go. A couple of things. First on your notes, letter A, you got to pay attention to your feelings. Pay attention to your feelings. And that's only going to happen if you understand and internalize those truths, that your feelings are actually a gift and your heart is a gift. Now you can pay attention to your feelings. Let me ask you to imagine this. Let's say tomorrow you're getting ready for work in the morning and you hear a knock at your door and you open the door and it's Jesus. Jesus is there and he's carrying this huge present just for you. And he says, I just wanted to drop this off before work. I have a gift for you. Here you go. And you take this thing, it's like, oh my goodness, you think you're a good gift wrapper? Jesus, man, he really wraps good. So you put it on your table and you're like, thank you. And he goes and you're like, oh my goodness, what's in the gift? It's like, oh man, this is amazing. And then you're getting kind of late to work. So you go back and you brush your teeth and get your hair done, get dressed, and you walk back out and you're like, there's a present. This is an amazing gift. It's like, well, I got to go to work. And so you go to work. Lunchtime, you come home and you're like, oh, this present looks incredible. And you eat lunch and look at the present. And then you get back in your car and go back to work. And then you come back after work and you see the present and you're like, this is such a great, look at this present. But, you make dinner for the kids and you get them all ready for bed and then you're tired. So you look at the present one more time. We're missing something, right? Open the present, right? If you believe that your emotions are really a gift from God and not a result of a mistake, then open the gift. It's interesting, if I could go back to that church in Madison, I would show them verses like this. The psalmist said, when you're on your bed, search your hearts. Don't ignore your heart. Search your heart. God doesn't give you a heart and give you feelings so that you can ignore them. He gives it to you so you can pay attention to them. The interesting thing about this is, again, as the field of science just grows, that they can put your body on these scans and watch what happens when you feel different things. It affects your body. For 40-some years, my body was being affected by emotions. I just wasn't paying attention to it. If you learn, like you may feel anxiety right through here, you may feel worry in the pit of your stomach, you can feel anger in the back of your neck. Your body is being affected by the emotions. You just won't let yourself pay attention to it. But if you pay attention to your feelings, you'll see that it's affecting you in life. So that's the first thing. It's a gift, so I got to pay attention to my feelings. The second thing is, now I got to try and identify what those feelings are. I got to try and identify what those feelings are. What are you feeling? And again, just read the book of Psalms, the biggest book right in the middle of your Bible. You will see them talk about their feelings constantly. Psalm 13:2, how long must I struggle with anguish in my soul, with sorrow in my heart? What was in his heart? Every day. Do you know what it's like to have sorrow in your heart every day? He did. And he was paying attention to how he felt, and that's how he could describe it. Now, the reality is, being raised in the home that I was in, where emotions were taboo, and believing that lie, that my emotions were a bad thing, the result of that was there were many, many times that I knew that I was feeling something and had no idea what I was feeling. Ever have that experience? Some of you know what that's like. It's like, I feel something, no idea what it is. So for years and years and years, and I still use this today, if you go online and Google chart of emotions, you'll see charts like this. This last week, every time I have an intense emotional experience, I sit down with this chart. I still do it. Happened this last week. Sat down and I said, what am I feeling? And it's amazing how many things you'll find that you're feeling that you're not even aware of. Your feelings, your heart has such depth to it. It's so deep. There's so much that can be in there. I need a tool like this. Now, some of you are more emotionally connected. You don't need this tool. I need it. And I use it all the time. Because the ultimate goal of this is this one. You want to name your feelings. I'm going to pay attention to it. I'm going to try and identify it so that I can name what I'm feeling. Here's how I'm feeling today. Again, just read the book of Psalms. Constantly throughout the book of Psalms, you see verses like this. I will be glad and rejoice in your unfailing love, for you have seen my troubles, and you care about what was in his soul. Do you know what anguish feels like? Some of you know what anguish feels like. To feel like your heart is just being ripped from your chest. And he named it. Now, the interesting thing about this, I think, if I could go back, one of the things I might consider as a career is the field of neuroscience. I find this amazing. Hook your brain up to these machines and watch what happens when you feel things. Do you know that when an emotion is activated in your brain, let's say it is anguish, you are in that much emotional pain, they can watch as the emotional centers of your brain are going crazy. But do you know what happens when they make you go through a list like that other one and name the emotion and you name it? Do you know what happens in the emotional centers of your brain? The activity goes down. In other words, just the act of naming it begins to help heal it. Did you know that? Now, here's the question. Why does that happen? Do you know why that happens? Because God made you so that you will function better when you are paying attention, like that opening verse, searching your heart, paying attention to your emotions and your feelings, not ignoring them. And if you want to try and ignore them, you're only giving yourself more pain. So how good are you at this one? Do you move toward your emotions? I mean, if I were to ask you today, what are you feeling? Could you honestly and accurately tell me what you're feeling today? All right. Now, all of this is fine, no big deal, not too complicated, but now we get into the real challenge of this. One of the reasons why people avoid this subject so much is, okay, let's say that you do what I say. You go home today, and you sit down and you say, I'm going to change the way I view my heart and my emotions. I'm going to view them as a gift from God. And I'm going to start opening the gift. Some of you have lived through so much trauma in your life that when you begin, you are going to encounter emotions that feel overwhelming to you. What in the world do you do with that? Number 3, now you have to learn how to calm those emotional reactions inside you. The goal is not just to make you feel sad or feel depressed. That's not the goal. There's a step beyond that. And this is where God is essential. Matter of fact, I don't really know how people do it without him. As I explain this, you'll see why I say that. You have to learn how to calm those emotional reactions inside of you. So here's what I want you to imagine. Let's say that after church today, you go to your home and you decide to go on a walk because it's a nice day. And you're walking along, and all of a sudden, up ahead on this curb, you see this strange sight. There's a little boy or a little girl, 5 years old, sitting on this curb. And they are crying in pain hysterically. And nobody's around. What do? Well, do you ignore them and just keep walking? Do you tell them to stop crying because they're disrupting your walk? If you choose that option, by the way, do the first one instead. Ignore them and keep walking. Don't add to their pain. Of course not. All of you are like, no. I'm going to go over and say, are you okay? What's wrong? Right? Pretty normal reaction. Except how few of us do that with our own selves. When you encounter that deep, deep pain inside of you, and all of a sudden you realize how depressed and anxious and scared or hurt you are, the first reaction is we just keep walking. We ignore that part of us. Or we try and tell it to be quiet. I don't have time for you right now. I don't want to hear this from you right now. And we try and numb it with an addiction or ambition or accomplishment. But what needs to happen for that part inside of us that got hurt to heal is that we need to actually do the opposite. We need to go like we would if we saw a child on the side of the road. We need to sit down and we need to actually listen to that part of us that's in pain. Now that's going to sound crazy. I want to ask for some grace, okay? Because what I'm about to say is going to create skepticism inside some of you. So would you put a pin in your skepticism for just a minute? Give me the chance to explain the first letter here before you just reject me. Give me a chance to get all the way through it, okay? Well, that's interesting. Never said that before, but here we go. Let me show you. You need to, letter A, learn to listen to that hurting part of you, like you would stop and listen to a crying child on the side of the road. Don't walk past it. Don't tell it to just shut up. But listen to it. Here's why this is so important. Listen to this. Everything you discover when you start searching your heart out, every emotion you name will make sense to you. Not initially, not when you first, oh my goodness, I'm feeling this. Why? It's there because of what you've experienced in life. So let's say this. Let's say that tomorrow I go into work and you go into work and we both get fired. Same experience, right? Same experience, both get fired. One person will respond to it one way and one person will respond to it a different way, right? One person will feel something and one person will feel something different. Same experience, and yet we feel different things. And the reason is because of the experiences we've had to that point in our lives. Your experiences are a huge part of what you're feeling when you start looking at your heart. Huge part. And they make sense because of what you've gone through. If we could actually hear your story, we'd say, oh, no wonder you were so sad when your neighbor said that to you. No wonder. No wonder you were so anxious when your boss came in and did that to you. No wonder. Your feelings make sense in light of what you've lived through to this point. Matter of fact, now you all also have big triggers, right? Are you aware of this? Some of you are aware of this more than others. You have big triggers. Sometimes somebody will say or do something and boom, the reaction's huge and the feelings are huge and maybe disproportionate to what you just said or did. You know where those triggers come from? One of my favorite authors, Dr. Henry Cloud, writes about this in his book, Changes That Heal. He says, well, here's what happens if you experience trauma, especially, okay, for those of you who suffered as a child. If you were abused as a child, sexually abused, verbally abused, emotionally abused as a child, if you faced neglect, abandonment, betrayal, you were a child. You didn't have the ability to handle that. You should have been nurtured and loved and supported, and you didn't get that. And when you suffer trauma as a child, what he said is, what happens is that part of you gets taken out of time. Now, time keeps going, but that part of you gets stuck right there. And that's why you have triggers. You have triggers because you've experienced pain in your past. And so when someone comes along and does something that associates with this pain in your past, oh, that part of you that's wounded steps up and says, warning, danger, Will Robinson. You are in trouble. You're about to be hurt again. And we overreact oftentimes. The feeling becomes controlling because we never dealt with that pain. And that wounded part of us is still wounded inside of us. We never moved on. So how do you heal that? How in the world do you begin to heal that? Because all of us have wounds from our past, every single human being. And those of you who are traumatized as a child, you have deep wounds. How do you begin to heal that? Okay? What you have to do is learn to listen to that broken part of you, just like you would listen to a child wounded on the side of the road. So this is where I'm going to ask you to consider something that most of you have probably never even thought about doing before. I'm going to ask you the next time you feel that intense emotion to talk to that wounded part of you. So you're like, Brian, are you actually saying I'm supposed to talk to myself? And I'm saying yes, and hold that thought. Okay? Just hold that thought for a second because it sounds crazy. Because crazy people talk to themselves, which, by the way, that's not true. I talk to myself all the time. So maybe that doesn't prove anything. Maybe that doesn't prove the point. But I'm actually asking you to talk to that wounded part of yourself. So let me give you an example. As I've been learning this, I had an experience at Land's End where I was asked to do something that in the past has not gone very well for me, and it has created so much anxiety. The last time I did it, it wasn't at Land's End, my hands were shaking. You ever been that anxious or scared that your hands are shaking? It's like, that's embarrassing. It's like, I can't even calm this down. So I'm like, so as the day came closer and got to the day when I was supposed to do this, I was so nervous and anxious. Now, here's what I was doing. There's this anxious crying kid on the side of the road, and I'm walking past it, ignoring it. It's like, do, not looking at it, not working. My anxiety's growing. It's not getting better. So then maybe you try and tell it, stop it. You're an adult. You're 47 years old. You can handle it. I mean, you try and, do what we do, right? Shut up, kid. Didn't work. So then I said, I need to have a conversation with this broken part of me. And so I literally said, why are you feeling so anxious? And it was like, well, this happened, and here was the outcome. This happened, and here was the outcome. This happened, here was the outcome. So I'm afraid that you're about to do this, and this will be the outcome. So I had this conversation with myself. And again, this sounds crazy. Hold that thought. And so when I sat and I had that conversation with this wounded part of me that goes all the way back to childhood, I heard what that broken part of me was saying. It made sense to me. I get it. And then I did what we talk about. You listen, you understand, and you validate that part of you. And once it felt like I had really listened to it, it was like it calmed down. Matter of fact, it got so calm that I went through that thing that day, and it was halfway through the time when I realized, not only are my hands not shaking, I'm not even nervous. That broken and wounded part of me just wanted me to be aware that this was coming so that I didn't get hurt again. And once it felt listened to, it moved on. It was silent. Now, the interesting thing about that is there are so many Christians around the globe who, if they listened to what I just said, would say, that is crazy. What Brian just told you is crazy. Talk about a bunch of Christian psychobabble. You're telling us to talk to ourselves? That never happens in the Bible, right? You can't find anyone in the Bible that ever talked to themselves. Why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Who's he talking to? We read these verses in Psalms and we don't ever stop to think about what they mean. All I'm asking you to do is what the writer of the book of Psalms did. The next time you feel down and you feel anxious and you feel scared, instead of walking past that part of you, instead of ignoring that part of you, instead of telling that part of you to shut up because you got a job to do, why don't you just stop and do what the Bible says to do? Talk to that. Why are you so anxious or scared or down or depressed? You'll be amazed at what comes out. Because that wounded part of you is still in there. And rather than ignore it and suppress it and deny it, listen to it. Now, you don't just stop there, though. You ask what story you're telling. Because that wounded part of you is telling you a story. That wounded part of you is telling you a story. You want to know where your emotions come from? This is it right here. This chart. I've shown it before. I love it. I need to show this all the time until we get this. You see and hear something. You tell a story. That determines how you feel, and that determines oftentimes how you act. So let me give you an example. I was reading in the Bible this last week, 2 Thessalonians. Paul wrote to the church in Thessalonica, and he said this: don't be so easily shocked or alarmed by those who say that the day of the Lord has already begun. So what was happening was this church in Thessalonica, there were these other Christians who were coming in and saying, oh my goodness, church, like they'd stand up in front of us and go, I'm sorry to let you all know, but the day of the Lord already started, and you all missed it. Now, the day of the Lord was the idea that Jesus was coming back imminently at any moment. And so when they came in and said this, you missed it. All of a sudden, they were scared and alarmed. They felt upset because they're like, oh my goodness, does that mean we're not really followers of Jesus? Is that what's happening? And so Paul wrote them and said, you're telling the wrong story. This is what was happening. They heard, you missed it. They told themselves a story. Oh my goodness, we missed it. That means we're not even really followers of Jesus. How does that make you feel? Well, that makes you feel pretty bad. And so Paul came back and said, challenge the story. When you hear somebody stand up in front of your church, I'm saying, I'm sorry, the day of the Lord started and all of you missed it. He said, tell the right story in that context. Sit there and look at that person and go, I feel sorry for you. You don't know what's really going on. Tell the right story. This person isn't telling the truth. And if you tell that story, you feel a very different way, don't you? So tell the right story. The reality is, some of you feel anxious today. Anxiety, by the way, is one of the worst feelings. I hate how I feel when I feel anxious. Like miserable. Some of you feel very scared today. Some of you feel depressed today. Underneath every emotion you discover, there's a story. So when you're trying to pay attention to that emotion, you've got to actually go back and say, so here's what I feel. So what your feelings are so important. They're indicators of reality for you. And if you back up and say, what's the story I'm telling? That's how you begin to really impact your life, because this is where God comes in. If you will do this, you'll pay attention to your feelings, back up and say, what's the story I'm telling myself? Then you have the opportunity to change your story because of God. And that's the third. Oh, by the way, some of you feel really bad today because this is the story in your head. Things are never going to change. I'll never heal. I'll always be treated this way. I'll never recover. Things will never get better for me. If you tell those stories, how are you going to feel? But with Jesus in our lives, we have the potential to change the story. And that's letter C, the final thing. Turn to God's promises to change that story. Turn to God's promises to change that story. This is really, really, really a significant message for me, because I do what I'm telling you to do. This is something I do. I never thought. I turned 48 this week. I never thought by my 48th birthday I would be starting a new career and divorced. I never thought that I would see so much pain in lives around me, from my kids, the people I love. Never thought any of this. And there are times when I don't feel very good about my life. And you know what the stories are? The stories are, well, I'll never have that kind of experience again with God. I'll never have, my future. I have no idea what my future holds. None. I don't know where I'm supposed to go next, what I'm supposed to do next. No idea. Many of you are in the same boat. You feel that way too. You don't know your next step. And that's a really scary position to be at for a man my age. And then this last week, this is what God does. I told you to put that Bible app on your phone. Let God send you verses each day. This week, this verse arrived. The Lord says, I will guide you along. Look at the next words. What kind of pathway? The best pathway for your life. And not only will he guide me, look what he says he'll do along the way. I'll advise you. Oh, and by the way, I will watch over you. And all of a sudden, my story about my future changed with one verse. Do you get it? This is what God offers us. I don't know how you get this without God. His promises are amazing. They are story changers. And so all of a sudden, I grab my notebook where I write down what things I'm praying about. That verse is written in. And when I get to that section about where I pray about my future, that's what I start with. And I say, God, you promised to put my feet on the best path for my life. And not only that, you said you'll advise me and you'll guide me. So and take care of me along the way. What do I have to worry about? And the emotion I get from focusing on what God says, can you imagine the emotion that I feel? How much better this feels when you listen to God's story and you let him change your stories. Let me have you bow your heads as we finish today. So again, I'm going to ask you that question. What's the condition of your heart? Some of you are so disconnected from your heart. You have been through so much pain, you have no idea. But we are commanded to love this God with all our heart. You cannot love God with all your heart if you are disconnected from it. And some of you know you got work to do today, big stuff. Because you are hiding from a very damaged heart. Because some of you, if we could hear your stories, we would weep. And it's time to do what the Bible says, to search your heart, to see it as a gift, to move towards it. And some of you, because of what you've lived through, you're going to need to see a counselor. And if you need a recommendation, just let me know. I can encourage you about somebody you can begin talking to about these things. Amazing thing is, what I said at the beginning, I believe to the core of who I am. Our God is a restoring God. He heals people. Our God is a healing God, and he can heal every aspect of your life. He heals you with truth and grace. And he wants to do his work from the inside. That's why Jesus came. 2,000 years ago, Jesus entered this world to die on a cross for all of us so that he could pay in full for everything we've done that's wrong. And for some of you, the next step is to let Jesus Christ come and make his home inside you. If you want this gift with your head bowed, you can say something like this to him. Say, Jesus, I turn to you. With the faith I have, I ask for your gift of forgiveness. Please come make your home inside me today and bring your healing power to me. Make me the person you want me to be from the inside out. In Jesus' name, amen. As we finish up today, would you please grab your little response card out of your program, even if you're a regular tender, just take a moment and fill this out. If you're a regular tender, you can just put your name down, don't have to fill it all in, but then maybe you made a decision to put your faith in him, or you renewed your commitment. Maybe you need to talk to that counselor I mentioned. Just go ahead and put counselor on that prayer section and we'll get you that information. Maybe some of you know you have been walking away from pain all your life, and this is a tough message for you. You know you got to start making some changes, and we will pray for you. So if you want to, put it in the offering box back by the doors where you came in. Yeah, Lee?
I know this wasn't part of the story. What happened to the dog?
Best line ever. Dog was just wrapped in its own chain and pulling and hurting itself, so dog was fine. Brian was a little screwed up, but the dog was just fine. Great question, Lee. All right. So drop this in the box on the way out. Thanks for coming, and hope to see you again next time.